Good evening to all those who are present here in Recife. Today is September 28. We're also transmitting live. Hundreds of people are accompanying us, and it's important for us to be very concentrated so that everything may flow all right. The topic of today is the consciousness of the present moment and our inner reality. As the structure of the lecture will have 50 minutes of the lecture itself, then we'll open up for questions, comments, and then we'll end. We are in a cycle of lectures here in Brazil. Yesterday we were in Fortaleza, today we are in Recife, tomorrow in Maceió, then afterwards in Salvador, Rio Grande do Sul, Florianópolis, Curitiba, Brasília, Rio de Janeiro, Friburgo, Teresópolis, Espírito Santo, and then I'll go back to Europe when at the moment I'm living for a period. Well, a lecture with this content goes beyond sharing information. It is a process that seeks to collaborate in the creation of a consciousness so that we may broaden our way of seeing, feeling, understanding, any ways of enriching our relationship with life. In this context, what we refer to as consciousness of present moment and inner reality. Our consciousness is very wider than our mind. In general, we associate our consciousness to what we think, right? When actually what we think is only a little part of our concrete mind, that which we have awareness of. But in the meaning of this context, consciousness is something very broader. So to work with the topic of present moment, the consciousness and the inner reality, it will be necessary to rebuild within us this conception of consciousness itself so that each one may accompany the development of this topic and identify oneself one way or another to their own consciousness. Well, when we are here and now physically, we'll have a very physical work, practical and internal. Our consciousness at this moment is here, present, or only physically. There's a little bit of echo, isn't it? Or only physically, our mind, our emotional body are eventually in other situations. And it is important for us to observe ourselves so that later on in our lives we may see why we can't be in the present moment, why we are attracted to what has happened already, or we have some tendency to have perspectives of the future and we cannot live here and now. And each one could wonder, what is the value? Why should we live here and now? Why is it important to be whole, to be full in the present moment? What we call to be present moment is not only what is happening outside of us. So something is going on outside of us, and the present moment is experienced by our consciousness in many levels. Internally, mentally, spiritually, and also in the emotional plane, and in the plane of feelings. So if we want to deeply enjoy our lives, we really need to pay more attention to this topic of the present moment, because it is where this environment in which our lives are developed as well, as we're going to see, and the only moment in which our learning experience is possible. Well, how broad is our consciousness from this point of view? While we're here physically, we're present, But where are our feelings? Where are our thoughts? Where is our more profound consciousness? And each one can observe themselves, because while we're interacting at this moment, it is how we generally interact in life, our capacity of being present, concentrated, attentive, and thus live a certain process. Beyond what we call our concrete mind, there is an environment where our consciousness lives. Therefore, we are here observing a content, we are listening to reflections, and something within us is observing it, right? Something within us is observing this whole movement, and this observer person, this observer being is the first level of our consciousness. So we are here present, mentally accompanying somehow these reflections, and something in us at the same time is observing what's going on, mentally, emotionally, physically. And at some moments our consciousnesses they concentrate and they go to another sphere within oneself, and confirming to each one of us that our consciousness is way broader than this external movement that we experience. We're going to see some points that we face daily that eventually hinder us to be exactly here and now, experiencing, living this experience. Why can't we sometimes exactly live what is in front of us, and we have a tendency of escaping from that, of looking for another reference and flee, let's say, from the present moment? So a question is coming, because when we make questions, answers come from within us, from this profound level, and we participate in the building, the construction of this content more actively from the internal point of view. So the question is, do we accept things just like they come to us, or do we fight so that they may come as we would like them to be? Something within us will run to answer, to say, yes, we accept it, but actually, if we could investigate it more deeply, we would see that we, in general, fight a lot to what happens. If it is more or less related to our expectancies, like a challenge, an unexpected event, something that wasn't foreseen, generally this causes some impact on us, and we begin fighting somehow with that to adapt that situation to our understanding, isn't it? So by not accepting things like they are presented, we step out of the present moment, because we're looking for a reference outside of what is happening, and that in this movement we move our consciousnesses and we lose that opportunity of learning something of what is coming to us. By accepting, it doesn't mean to submit to something that may not be in accordance to our consciousness. It's just an initial movement of receiving what is coming and allow that which is coming to us to interact with our consciousnesses, and then develop a process of learning experience. But if we repel, if we reject that which is coming, either it is mentally, internally, emotionally, or even physically, because we interpret that not to be according to our learning experience, perhaps we'll be losing a great opportunity of learning something, because we're limiting our own capacity of receiving something different from our way of being. So this acceptance of things just like they come to us would be a first possibility of having our consciousnesses in the present moment, and by observing ourselves, observing this that's coming, approaching, then we'll begin a certain internal process. But like we were saying before, our consciousnesses are very broader than our concrete minds, this thinking and analytical mind. So if we're searching to widen this consciousness, if we can see and if we are interacting with life in a broader way, it's very important to be attentive to what's going on within us in this internal environment, a lot beyond this thinking environment, because the thinking environment is based on our previous experiences, on the analytical movement of judgments, analysis, comparisons. And therefore, if life is placing us before something wider, and if we are limiting ourselves, conditioning this experience, that which our minds are experiencing, will be limiting what will happen within us. So it's very important in this movement of being in the present moment and attentive to the inner reality to seek while we think, and how much we discern, how much we filter that which is coming to us, and at the same time search within us for that observer being that is trying to organize all this collection of impressions so as to identify at what level of consciousness it is happening, what is coming to me, and eventually be able to be at that moment in which something's happening. Another very observable point in all of us is our difficulty of keeping our attention on the flow of things. That is to say, to be concentrated in that which is happening. So we are looking, we are there before something that's happening before us, but our minds end up dispersing and being attracted either to an influence of the collective mind that has a certain magnetism, or influenced by an emotional astral movement of some desire or some thought that takes us out from the present moment of what's going on, and then we end up being kind of split, divided. Well, one question: do we feel in a more internal and broad order, or do we only feel ourselves in this chaos that external life expresses in general, or do we perceive that at some moments there are something higher, transcendental to our comprehensions, and there do we seek to have some attunement with that? And if we feel ourselves in this order of higher consciousness, what is preventing us from remaining in that consciousness with more stability? Something very common in our human consciousness is what we call as anxiety and anguish. Have we ever asked ourselves where this anxiety is coming from? Why do we become anxious in our daily lives, even without having an external stimuli for this? This is born from this proportion between the expectance we create for our lives, for our days, for our lives, for our days, for our dreams of life. So, when there is some distance and some disproportion between our expectancies and reality, this movement of anxiety emerges, which should be investigated by us. I'm saying by us because eventually we are seeking to have some interaction with life, a wiser one and less superficial one, and with more contention and maturity. So the reality of this context is what life is bringing to us. And does life knows less than us? Does life and this infinite wisdom of everything that happens doesn't have some order behind it that leads all of our experiences? Do we feel the lords of our lives? Do we have control upon it? Well, this reflection is important as we want more and more eventually to enjoy and potentialize our experience at this moment that we're living. Because you see, life is only possible at this moment. Oh, but doesn't my memories have life? It has some emotional life, mental life, but it's not true life. We can remember something, activate some records, think or remember some experience, and that could bring or activate some emotion, some feeling. But this is not life itself. This is not this impulse, this vitality that keeps us attuned with something wider. However we want to call this wider thing, like universe, like life, God, infinity. Each one has their way of understanding and feeling all of this. But this experience, the contact with this is only possible through this very moment. Therefore, if our lives, as we call them, is interrupted tomorrow, we won't even be able to experience or anticipate the situation. We'll only be able to experience life at this very moment. But in society, it's exactly the opposite of this. We are taken to live the past, what we have already lived, or to create a perspective or some expectance on some experience that is only possible through what we're living now. Future, what we call to be future, actually I'll correct myself, is only possible through which we're building now, attracting through this moment. So up to a certain point, the present moment of what we call future, we experience something, but it can only happen at the present moment. Can you see it? So today is Wednesday. What's going to happen on Friday will happen on the present moment. Do you agree with that? It won't happen on Friday. When Friday comes, I'll experience it at the present moment. And we are deceived by this mental and analytical process, and we go a little bit putting our experience onwards, and we don't afford to live now and here. We expect something to happen in the future, or we feed what had happened before, which is a record, and it's not negative. Without a doubt, what had happened proportioned a synthesis, and by activating that synthesis, the codes of that synthesis will nourish some aspect of our consciousnesses. But the present moment and the alignment with our inner reality is only possible here and now. Well, if we want to step out from a certain region of frustration, if we want to concentrate our efforts, if we want to transform something, for this transformation to begin happening exactly here now. So those who say, oh, I want to transform myself, and I will begin that on Sunday. But when Sunday comes, it will be here and now, it won't be on Sunday. And then we'll say, oh, it will be on Wednesday. And we pull that situation, because by creating that situation, that afterwards we will take that situation that we must be before, everything that we need to experience, and we end up not transforming ourselves, not experiencing what's going on here and now. When the day comes that we self-promised to begin that process, we promised to do something else, and 10, 15, 18, 30 years pass and we are at the same point. Isn't this a frustration? Isn't it more intelligent and simple to get the potential of this very moment and work here and now? And then we'll expand our consciousnesses, we'll mature our process of expansion, and thus life will go on with a lot of simplicity. Because you see, true transformations are only built from a certain moment in which we begin the process of transformation, and they happen at a certain moment in some present moment, but it won't be on Sunday or in October. It will be at the present moment after I mature some phase, some cycle, and at a certain point that process will be matured in me. Have you ever observed yourselves when you wake up one day and someone or some situation activates in us some kind of reaction and we see ourselves different? So something activated intolerance, impatience, antagonism, and that same situation is before us, and without us being conscious of that process, we observe that we no longer interact in the same way. What happened? Probably at some moment we made a decision of not nourishing those reactions, and that unleashed within us a process of transformation. We used to have a conviction of that was a right decision, and at a certain point that will be matured, and when that stimulation comes, it won't activate that reaction in me. But that culminating moment of transformation, for example, of a step, however, whatever we want to call it, it can only emerge at the present moment that we're living it. It's not possible to live something in the future or live something in the past. We can indeed reactivate records of what we lived in the past, and by activating that memory will activate some state within us. But it is only a state, only a record, only some memory. It's not an experience of the contact with life at this very moment. Wow. We also need to be watchful today about the convenience of wanting to receive everything ready. That is, we want to be adults, mature, to have a more solidary consciousness with the humanity, the planet, but we want this ready. We want the planet ready, and we want everybody else to be ready, so that I may enjoy from that and not have that intrinsic work of collaborating in this process of building these situations. So something that takes our attention of what we're living, and therefore our opportunity of learning something with what we're receiving at this moment is our expectance of receiving something ready from the outside. So the society is making us have this vice of being used to receive everything ready ideas, ready thoughts, so that we may get this and make this our own and lose our authenticity, everything that is genuine within us. And one day we'll ask ourselves, but after all, what am I? Am I this that I keep? Am I this thought that I have Am I this way of reacting, feeling that they built in my consciousness? So all this has to do with a process that is born within us. And from a question, what kind of human being do I want to be? What human being do I aspire to be? What kind of human being do I wish to manifest so as to collaborate with what I believe in? Or I believe in something, I believe in a kind of world, an expression of humanity, a relationship with humanity, with the planet. But as long as it is ready, if I need to participate in it, oh no, it's not with me anymore. So we must be very careful with this, because this could lead us to some states of frustration, because days pass by, we interact with life, but do we interact with life in a creative way, in a constructive way, in an innovative way, truly from a plane of contact with superior matrices, or do we only interact with life repeating patterns that we don't even know where they came from, patterns of behavior, ways of thinking, ways of interpreting life, and thus we atrophy our consciousness. Charlie Chaplin was a comedian, and he used to say, "Be careful, for when you say tomorrow not to mean never again." Because many times we perceive something that we need to understand in another way, or we could feel in a different way, or that we could participate in life in a different way, and something tells us, oh, tomorrow, I'll see that afterward. I'll begin next week. Oh no, next month I'll pay attention to this. And when we see months are gone, decades, and we see ourselves and we consider in the same mechanism, oh, tomorrow I'll take care of this. Tomorrow I'm going to face the situation. So it's very healthy for us to remember that everything that we need is available at this moment before us. But as the world makes us believe the opposite, isn't it? Everything that is offered to us, society in general, because this is a collective thought to lead us out of our inner potential and to depend more and more on what comes from the outside to feel at peace and complete, isn't it? So there are bombs of stimulations for us to acquire something that will promise us to be more complete beings, more evolved beings, or anyway, beings more aligned with the harmony of the planet. And by the results of what we can see in humanity, it seems like it's not working out very well. And it seems like this is not the path. And that we are not having any pretensions of presenting any situations, only to highlight that there is something at this very moment within us, and that it is a key for us to re-find this environment of the consciousness and to step out a little bit of this collective pattern and enter into something more real that we know that exists. But as we allow ourselves to envelop with the collective thought, this goes out from us and we feel very confused. Well, each one of us has experienced some kind of trauma, right? A physical trauma, emotional, mental, in some moment of our lives. Either they are in childhood, in adolescence, in adult life, in abstract life or in concrete life. The fact is that this brings to us some kind of feeling of fears. It creates some fears in the region of our subconscious and unconscious, and it also does not allow us to be at this moment completely trustful and confident that it's possible to restart. So we receive an impact that is only a name. It could be an interpretation. And the word trauma here is not linked to anything negative. It is a trauma, it's an experience that eventually impacts our beings in many levels. And there it brings a record that we call trauma. But many times, this very trauma is that moment that helps us to reveal, to make a process of renewal, a process of revision in our consciousnesses, and make some decisions to rebuild our lives, our thoughts, our ways of being, our habits. And this is out of time, you see. It has not much to do with our physical age, our chronological age. It has to do with that decision that we make of rebuilding our lives. Unless we may have the tendency of giving up, giving in, and think that no construction is possible, which is not actually the reality. So, do we realize, do we perceive each moment as an opportunity to restart? Or do we throw to some moment in the future the situation of restarting? So I identify within myself a deep need of restarting, and restarting what? Restart to live. Restart to rebuild this communion with life, communion with the universe, rebuild my own deep expression. Unless we may be comfortable just like we are, and then it could be that living in the present moment with all the potential that it brings, it wouldn't be something very nice for us. But if we perceive each moment as an opportunity of restarting, we will rediscover that there is a huge potential within us, within the facts, within situations, and our perspective self-limits us to mobilize this potential. Why is that? Because in general, we place this potential for Sunday, for next week, we postpone it, or we know that's something necessary, but we put it aside. We afford ourselves to identify this situation of transformation, and we postpone that, or we place it in a box, we label it, and we leave it there to someday take care of that. But when we take that box, we'll be living in the present moment. There is no way of leaving this. We could have a 80-year-old box, and you get that box in the present moment. You can't step out of this. So you see, this reflection is for those of us who really want to discover potential at this very moment and in each moment of this life, and who want to build a more peaceful destiny, a more harmonious, solidary, evolutionary destiny, if we want to understand it in this way. Have you ever felt the sensation, the feeling that you're leaving something behind? Have you? We don't really know what it is, but we know that we're leaving something behind. We are somehow neglecting something in our lives, in our thoughts, in our relationships, in our professions, in our desires. Something is being left somewhere behind. And why is that? And when we perceive this, we realize this, do we conform with this, or are we going to investigate it? Will we go after it and think, wow, I feel like something is being left behind. What is it? Where is it? Where does this impulse that is calling me to this, and I continue neglecting this for some reason? Why do I not face it? Why do I don't want to find what is being left behind? It could help us in this to ask ourselves if we're looking for the learning experience beyond the facts. Collective thought leads us many times to judge, to interpret what happens, but not to seek for a meaning beyond what is happening, because many times life itself is bringing something that may happen before us to stimulate something within us so that we may learn something, so that we may be in contact with those stimuli and learn from that, from another point of view. But if my consciousness is a wall, if I only see by the message that is that wall, in that fact, I lose during the day thousands or even hundreds of opportunities of learning, and I limit my consciousness to this pattern, sorry for the expression, to this mediocre pattern of the collective, which has a thought form of how things are and how things are interpreted. So something happens to someone in front of me, and if I don't develop this mechanism of looking to learn beyond the facts, I'll immediately judge that. Something happens in my mind, will gather all those little boxes of form thoughts, and I'll label that, oh, this is one thing, but I didn't even give time and give the opportunity to deepening a little more through that stimuli and learn something through that situation that is happening right in front of me. And we could ask ourselves, but why is this for? It is for if we want to be human beings constantly evolving. But if we think this is fine, so this is lecture we won't be very necessary. This is for those who are looking to live something broader, to live something beyond the facts, the situations, so as to mature all those values and better qualities that are intrinsic to any human being. It's not a privilege that begins to anyone, only for some to dedicate, but the great majority ends up conforming to a more superficial thought. And then the reflection is this: do we want a superficial life, and will this be enough for us? Or do we need to, or do we identify a profound need of breaking something and reaching a wider comprehension? For instance, when something unexpected happens, something impacting, for example, an unexpected loss or some situation in some level. And at that moment, we realize our fragility. Or also at that moment, we realize how worthwhile it was to try to strengthen our consciousnesses, to interact with those stimuli with more perspective, including all that impact that our personality experiences. But if we are seekers, if we are seeking a more profound consciousness at this very moment in which that impact happens, that doesn't hit us, strikes us very much as if we had a common and superficial consciousness. Another aspect of the present moment, can we manage to keep our priorities along the day? What are priorities for us? Are they external conquests? Are they material things? Or do I give priority to my internal states, to the quality of life, to the quality of my relationship with life? Is it more important than the facts? Because in this sense of priority, I can eventually notice that my consciousness is a little more highlight, ample, in perspective from everything that's happening, and thus the learning experience is a lot easier. I'll be able to keep my priorities more orderly, because otherwise we'll make this decision. Well, tomorrow I will dedicate myself to develop a more fraternal narrative, flexible narrative, comprehensive narrative, less intolerant. And then, if I don't follow this priority, everything that will come will absorb my consciousness, and at night I'll remember, oh, I didn't remember once at least to be less intolerant with others. I lost my patience, I argued, I was inflexible, I didn't give priority to be loving with others, to listen to them, to be receptive, to try to understand them. So, if we have some intention of developing all of this, we need to establish priorities for us with short, small goals that we can reach. Like this previous example, I'll make the decision to be more comprehensive and more receptive to what is happening around me. So I'll be attentive to that, and in the moment of the day, I'll observe it. Am I being able to do it? Am I really concretizing this priority? And all this will concentrate our consciousness at this present moment. Very well, these have been many impulses, many stimuli, and in this is the message for us to observe the situation of the world today, of this complexity and this absence of presence in what is happening right now. Therefore, like we've seen, from one moment to another, what used to be a planetary emergency disappeared. One day we had the pandemic, on the other day a conflict starts, and the pandemic ends, wasn't it? And we all leave one boat and we enter another one, and we don't even reflect about it. We don't realize about the manipulation. We don't realize how our consciousness was interacting with the situation, with another, and we're taken from one side to another without reflecting on our experience. So for this lecture to be worthwhile, we need to ask ourselves, do we want to learn, to evolve, broaden our consciousness, make this a better world for the youth, for children? Do we want to build a more solidary relationship with other human beings? If it is so, it would be necessary for us to be present with what is happening at this moment. Otherwise, have you ever seen those images of hundreds or thousands of people walking in the streets? If we take the sound of if we look at the glances, you see that each one is in their personal interests. Imagine nearly 9 billion people thinking about a moment that is not the present moment. So this is a big dissociation, and it hinders the learning experience that life brings to each one of us at each moment and continuously. You see, the present moment, you don't need to buy it, you don't need to invest in it. You don't need to believe in it or not. You just need to adhere, to remember, to value, and not to lose this opportunity. That is the only opportunity for us to experience life here and now. There is no other time for that. Very well. Would you have any questions about this? We have a microphone here if anyone has any question, so those who are in the transmission can also accompany. After someone asks the first question, the others will come. It's always like this, so there's always a first brave one. How can we distinguish what we are receiving, if it's something that is coming from the collective or if it is something internal from us? How can we distinguish this? It's a very good question. This question presupposes, let's say, for us to be attentive to our inner world, to be attentive to what we believe in or that we know that is correct, that corresponds to our values. So when something comes from the collective that does not correspond to this, immediately it emerges. We all experience this. It's something like a warning that says, oh, this does not belong to me, this is not part of my consciousness. But you see, if we are not used to nourishing this inner life, what comes from the outside is very strong, and it will make us believe that when we look at young people and we adults thinking about something that is not part of us, it wouldn't be a genuine aspiration of ours. We even want to change our appearance. Where is it coming from? Something that doesn't come from within us. We all know perfectly well what it is and what it isn't, just like it is and how it is. This is the only reality. So the collective pressures us a lot to be something that we are not. And this is a very important question, because it will be a great step if we could renounce and really keep some distance from what we know we shouldn't be. Even if we may not know consciously what we should be or what we should transform into, only the fact of, I want to avoid this word, but denying to be avoid to be something from the collective that does not coincide with us. Only this will preserve our consciousness. This bombarding of thoughts is so great. It can even be coward, especially for children and young people. Bombs of information with no meaning. So it's very important to highlight this. If we manage to be faithful to what we know that is correct, we don't need to fight with what is coming from the outside. We just don't need to adhere to it. So a collective thing of thoughts are coming. I need to be in perspective, observing from that point, from what is ours, internal, and that can't polarize in our consciousnesses. But if I allow myself to be very imbued, enveloped in the collective thought, my subconscious, all the matter that will nourish a conscious thought and my reactions are the subconscious collective thought. We could say, well, I have very little contact with the collective, but you see, if we could count so much visual information we receive, after you leave this place and you go home, observe how much visual information you receive outdoors, propagandas. It's so much visual information, and it all goes to our subconscious, and one day our emotional body or our mental body mobilizes one of those records, activates something, and it seems like it belongs to us. It's not ours, it comes from the collective. So how can we know? By being watchful, filtering, discerning, and this exercise of being in the present moment helps us a lot. Because if we are in the present moment, we give our consciousnesses an opportunity of filtering it. But if we are always there, we'll be very vulnerable to this collective movement because our consciousnesses won't be able to control this movement. This is very dispersed, this is very centrifugal, you see. I don't know if I answered your question. Any other questions? Friar, thank you for your lecture. Well, the importance of the observer being. You said a few times, you talked a few times about this space, this point. It is important how even a channel to a deeper dimension, how can we enjoy being present, put this in perspective, this point of the observer, so that we can really go deeper, right? It seems to me like this is a key. It is a key and it's an important question, and it's the following. The true observer being emerges when we are not thinking about ourselves. We are thinking about evolving, expanding our consciousnesses, but like a movement to serve the world and the humanity. Because if the observer being is only observing for an opportunity to benefit from the world more, this is a false, a fake observer. I don't know if I'm explaining myself. We have the physical observer, the emotional observer, and the mental observer. And the deeper observer that goes beyond the mental plane, which is the true observer, and we can distinguish from when it observes, and the attitude it has an observer is to not want anything for oneself. So if there is some situation that we need to make a decision, or if we need to participate in it, what I call as observer manipulates that situation in self-benefit. That is not the true observer, and many fall in this, because by observing from this perspective and not to be very evolved, only to have some self-benefit. So the true observer is when we are there in perspective, seeing or living that situation and really mobilizing, or even, I'll correct myself, being mobilized something within us to collaborate in that situation. So there is a transition here between living a selfish movement, or also live the world that we need to experience eventually, but being able to collaborate there somehow in a parcel of the consciousness from the angle that could collaborate in that movement. So it is indeed a key, but with this, being careful with this, of the selfish observer and the more profound observer that can observe, always looking how I can help in any situation. And you see, our life would be different. Even if we have priorities, commitments, human choices, karma, everything that we can find here in our daily lives, if in some space of our consciousness is including this aspect, and I also place myself as an observer so that any opportunity may mobilize the potential to serve, however it is, our lives will be a lot more peaceful. Because otherwise all this stimulus that comes from the outside will influence to an artificial fight that I don't need. I met someone that said, I worked in a photo agency in which I manipulated people to make photo programming that they didn't need with money that they didn't have to share with people that they didn't like. It's all out of the path, you see, and we are bombarded by this collective to have something or do something. And where is it coming from? I want to be that by which I was created for. This is the question to be made. Why am I doing here after all? Do I want to be part of this confusion, be one more among these billions? Or do I want to express something that makes me be at peace? that collaborates a little for the harmony of the planet. Right, we have a question here on the front. Friar, I perceive that one of the things that most collaborates for us to be at this present moment and be in this state of... I never thought about these various observers, but I notice that what happens me a lot is to try to have a connection with the heights and to have a deep breath, because I practice yoga for many years, so this helps me a lot. Of course, you see, everything that is an exercise is practiced for a while. A yoga of this moment is the yoga of daily life. It is a yoga of the life that keeps going. Of course, that by educating your mechanism through some exercise, you will create a condition to more and more be in that state that you reach through an exercise. But it's a lot simpler to be present, to be available, to be complete, because at this present moment, there's life itself. It is what you call as the heights. The height is not height, it's just that you place you in a low place, so you need to seek for that high place to feel this sensation of coming closer. The height is in everything, because it's an interpretation of ours. This is all human perspective. Life is life, a lot simpler than our interpretation. So, if in the present moment we are in the particles of this whole, this heights, using your expression, your word, immediately I'll relate to what is high through the present moment, and I'll feel complete. There is no yoga, no therapy. It is simple. And it is so simple that we don't believe in it. But we don't need to pay the gym to reach this. We don't need to pay any gym. We don't need to live with an Indian master on the mountains. No, we don't need that. Of course, if you come to meet an Indian master, it's very good, very important, but don't be dependent on him, because we all have this privilege of being alive. It's simple like this. But the collection of collective thought led us to think that everything is outside of us, that the solution is out of us, that the wise person is outside of us, that the height is outside of us, and then we remain looking outside of us when that is only waiting for us to identify to it in the present moment. It's worthless. Oh, I unite to this today at 7 p.m. Oh, it doesn't work like this. If we're going to schedule a union with the universe, this would be ridiculous, right? Our union is continuous. Why don't we live in a harmonious way of life? Because we always think that what is happening is not happening according to our expectance, and this filters an infinite potential of possibilities that we simply deny to live. You just need to open the door, very simply. Any other question? Friar, prayer would be this exercise that we need in order to live the present moment more constantly. Complementing her question, would it be what Jesus called to be the state of prayer? You see, when we are alive, our life is continuous. It's not like we pray and then we stop living, and then we pray again, or we meditate. Let's use more universal words, okay? So word is a condition that we create in this relationship to what we call as the height. There we will select values, words more, and in the movement of the consciousness, we connect to something wider. But life is continuous, life is infinite. Life is a continuous process, and what we call to be prayer or meditation, a concentration of our attention, and by coming or being aware of something. Of course it helps, but it is an exercise and it's not life itself. Can you see it? Oh, but I'm praying all the time, so you don't need to call it prayer anymore. You can say that you live in the state of prayer, which is in a state of being attentive to the present moment and to many levels of consciousness, simple like this. And of course there are many ways we call spoken prayer, decrees, all worthy things, mantras, canticles, many useful things. The useful thread of life is to commune with life and live this state of communion, meditation, yoga, whatever it is. It is an exercise on the path of it, but beyond the moment of the exercise there is life. Even if I pray 12 hours a day, okay, what do I do in the other 12 hours of the day? It would be an incoherence. Maybe if I'm looking to be prayerful, it would be more intelligent to look for the state 24/7 and then maintain my consciousness as stable as possible in this state of prayer. And not to only have this as an exercise and then I'll hide behind this exercise, as the majority does, to live something that has nothing to do with prayer or to that state that I experienced. It's a lot simpler to commune with life, and then this process would emerge very naturally. I don't know if I answered. Any other question? Where's the microphone? This thing, Friar, of us never being satisfied with the present moment, that present moment never corresponds to our expectance. Would it be a little of arrogance from us, and would be the path to be simpler and be looking to be good regardless of what's going on around us? We need to aspire to manifest our best with no expectancies. This is a great liberation, you see, because if I want to do something and I have some expectance and that doesn't correspond to it, the reality is that I live in frustration, and the worst of it is that the seed will weaken my aspiration. One day I'll give up on it. But I myself do this movement of boycott. If I want to offer my best all the time with no expectance, this is a liberation. I'll offer this, waiting nothing in return. I'll be confident to what I'm doing. But if that doesn't correspond, maybe it is because the result of my aspiration is showing that the effort was correct, but the result was different. And this is not a problem at all. What is the problem of it? Many times it's even better than what I built with my aspiration, but I was so fixed, so rigid, even fanatic about how it should be, that I live some worthless frustration sometimes, because it showed me that it wasn't like that. And the most bizarre of all of this is that it's many times than what I built before, but as it wasn't exactly how I built in my expectance, I feel frustrated. And do you realize how the mind really distorts the process a lot? But the thermometer was the consciousness, and the consciousness, we turn inwards, we feel at peace. And this peace is a good indicator at some degree. We'll want to express something without that expectance, because by creating expectances, it's the path towards frustration. It's inevitable. Our expression is, so you see, one important thing in our question is this: the collective pressures us because it's expecting something from us, and we end up being afraid of it. Or, but if I be somehow, maybe I won't be accepted at home or even in other places. So this, you have your decision. Do you want to be yourself, or do you want to be just one more among the 9 billions who are building a very strange world? That it seems that it's not working out. It seems. I don't see another direction for this. So not to have expectance pacifies a lot, and the concept of aspiration and in my consideration of being the best as possible that I know I can be. Am I going to be depend on others, depend on the world to be in peace? This is a decision that we need to make. Here we have a question from the internet. Gabriel is asking, Friar, before this confusing collective reality, what tools would you indicate us to exercise in a to observe the inner realities? To live life just like it is, combined with some aspiration of manifesting what we think it is correct. So, in this pulse of this rhythm of what's coming from the outside and what's coming from within, in this chemistry, our evolution happens there, in this interaction and in this confirmation of what I am perceiving and what's coming from the outside. And not the sick search of responding from expectance of the collective losing completely your inner reality, your inner identity. To look somehow for this inner reality, delineate for oneself goals, priorities, and look to place your life in this, regardless of what is happening outside of us. Because if we depend on approval of that, really, this should be something multitudinous. This would make very difficult for us to have peace, because the world is going in another direction, it's very conditioned, and we shouldn't depend on this to be in the present moment doing this exercise of placing our priorities, catch up with our priorities, filter from what's going from the outside and make a decision, a commitment of projecting in the world, of taking to the world a constructive and evolutionary code. Okay? Very good. Any other question to end? Another question here from the chat. Friar, how can we activate our creativity? Janete Domingues asked this question. How can we activate our creativity? First of all, asking, what is creativity for us? In the art field, for example, people call creativity to get some ink, throw in, sell it for millions of dollars. They call it creativity, but let's not lower the level of this lecture. So creativity is our relationship with life. So if we believe, if we feel and we know we are part of a higher life, naturally, this impulse will come from us, which is an impulse that we call creativity, of collaborating, co-creating with the world, with the reality, with nature, from this profound conviction that we are part of creation. But if we think that creativity, just like the observer, is born from an inferior level, then we'll create these situations, the songs of today, music of today, also that please. It's got very little of creativity. What they do is to lead us to another direction. Creativity is something intrinsic to our nature, just like the state of connection to what we call as height. But we need to know this, activate this within us, with this decision of wanting to be a constructive, evolutionary being that may collaborate with the world, that may build a better world, so our creativity will naturally be aligned with this great, broader plan, and thus it will be a very natural process. Thank you for your lecture. I have a question, which is this. To be present at the present moment, would it be like the awakening of the inner consciousness to this consciousness of our soul, our essence? The present moment would be the opportunity of immediately discovering everything that you mentioned. Because all this exists already, it's like creation. Are we by any chance going to recreate creation? Creation exists already. We are part of a great life, and not to be in the present life. By being in the present moment, I'll be communing with the many levels of creation. I'll begin interacting with different levels, and in this pulse, in this rhythm, I'll get used to be a little more conscious to everything that was within me. That will not emerge only by being in the present life. If it mobilizes my consciousness, I can manage to be present. It's the contrary. Our human part has no control on this. Our human part eventually decides either to place correctly and find out or discover that there is something wider and that it needs to silence itself and be present there. It is a totally natural process. What happens in the present moment, in this life that keeps going in everyday's life, right? Well, one last question for us to finalize. How can we help people who are paralyzed before the planetary events? Maria de Fatima da Silva, we can only help in some situation if we are living something different, right? The best way of helping is by giving examples on what we speak, what we feel, what we say. So by being that, this is the best way of helping. Because many times we have some situation of idealism, we idealize something, we want to help, but words can convince maybe up to a certain point, to some extent, but what leads a situation forward, what helps situations to be transformed are the examples. So if we want to help, we need to be that which we believe to be different, not better. Better could be an interpretation of ours. To be something that we believe in, that will help there, to offer that, and of course, if we have some expectance, we'll face some frustration, and it will show us clearly that it wasn't exactly a desire of serving, but a desire of protagonizing, competing, and showing superior to others. So we need to be very attentive to this, a lot of attention. So by being present in this attitude, life itself will organize, and with time we'll learn to be here and now, at this very moment, in a more constructive, evolutionary way, and eventually build a better world and more harmonious. So good night. Thank you for being present here, and those who want to continue following these lectures, tomorrow will be in Maceió and then in Salvador. In the same channel of Irdin Publishing House, it's an open channel, a free link, so we'll see you in the transmissions and maybe in Recife again. Thank you very much, and good night to all.